Paralegal.
Gary Hollins, committee member.
Joy Brim Edwards, board member and committee member.
Irene McMahon, student representative.
Dan Young, Chief Operating Officer.
Jonathan Garcia, Chief of Staff.
Dana White, director for planning and real estate.
Kirsten Cowden, real estate manager.
Great, thank you, everyone. We are going to make a small change. Sorry, Roseanne, did you have something to add?
I think I saw Liz was in the meeting, so I was gonna have her introduce herself.
Oh, Liz.
She was.
She's born.
I see her as a participant. So Liz Large, our general counsel, is also in attendance virtually for this meeting. We have been asked by staff to make a change to the order of the agenda and allow the CUB conversation, the CUB conversation, to happen first due to other meetings and other things on their agenda today. So we're going to go ahead and open with that conversation about our community use of building programs. So Dan, are you the one that's going to lead us through this conversation at this time? Or is it Liz?
I think it's going to be, I think we're going to kick it over to our Director of Planning and Real Estate, Dana White. I'll just notice that, or note that in the packet, there is a memo to this item. And then unless Liz has anything, I'm trying to read the expressions. We'll let Dana take it away.
You're on mute. Oh, we can't hear you.
Oh, that's a
Computer
yes.
still has.
Oh,
I think
think we're good to go. So we did, like Dan said, we sent out a memo that providing additional information. So, and then there were some questions that also came up that we wanted to answer or respond to. Were there? What's that? Oh, were there questions? Were there any questions on the memo that we sent or comments or things like that?
I know that Director Hollins had shared some questions via email last night, and I'm not sure if staff has had a chance to respond to those yet. And I know that since you just got them last night, there may not have been a chance.
No, I appreciate that. And actually, yeah, I think we'd like to respond to them, provide some more information. The first question was specifically how has the Res-J lens been applied to the CUB policy and EADs? And so there's a few answers to that. As you know, we do provide for 8 hours of no-cost CUB use to our Title I CSI, TSI schools. And we also prioritize our scheduling with our community partners for the academic year, such as Sun and some of those folks. And we do the same thing with the summertime. We start planning for summer in the fall. We started in October. But we hold everything until our Res-J partners have determined where they're going to be and what their needs are first. So that's our base layer before anything else gets added. And I will say that the CUB team works really closely with the PTAs, the school secretaries, and folks out in the community. And they're very good about helping people. If there's racial equity, there's also social justice, right? We have a lot of folks, especially maybe in our southeast area, that where English isn't their primary language, or maybe technology is, kind of is scary for folks. And I hear them all the time out there walking people through. Here's what we do. Here's how you do it. Here's what we can do. And really trying to be available so there's not any barriers to folks being able to use our buildings. So that was my response to that. Is there questions about that or comments?
Yeah, so I don't really see how specifically that we use the Res-J lens within the policy. It seems like what you're saying is just some of the partnerships that we have already in place, whether it's Sun, whether it's the YMCA, whether it's the Parks Bureau. It seems like you're just talking about those groups, but how specifically, when we talk about accessibility, how has the Res-J lens, how have we used the Res-J lens for that portion of it, not just contracts that we already currently have?
Well, and some those aren't contracts we currently have. Those are other, and Danny's not here to speak to that, but there's a lot of different groups that only use our buildings during the summer or provide programs during the summertime, and we do prioritize all of that. We don't. Go ahead. Sorry.
Are those part of the summer programming that we do for the district? Is that what that?
Yes, yes. That, and which is that, right, and it's just big, as you know, that's really large. We don't, make people move if there's somebody else who wants their space that, is from an underserved area. So other than that, it's really first come, first serve. We do our best to try to make it as barrier-free as possible for everybody. Kirsten or Dan?
And I just wanted to be clear that, the amounts we charge, I know that, like Director Hollins, you had raised an example of your organization is using Ida B. Wells on the weekends and you're paying several $1,000s. And what I understand is the amount that we charge any group is a portion of what it costs us as the district to fund the space, right? The custodial, the heat, the utility, the insurance. So even already when we're charging groups an amount, it isn't the full amount, it's partial cost recovery, correct?
That's correct. And with our Res J groups in the summertime, we don't charge them anything. So if Kirsten wants to come along and do something in the summer and we have room, great, but she's got to pay for it. That's a different situation. So we can try to make the barrier as easy as possible, barrier-less.
Okay,
So I wonder how, do we have different, sorry, Director Hollins, do we have different, go ahead, you ask your question. I already asked one.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. I was going to go ahead. So we talk about summer programming, and I think the summer programming is great. But when we also talk about outside organizations that, are made up of primarily of PBS kids, that does not fall under summer programming. And we know like this year we have cuts, so we probably don't have cuts in summer programming, right? So, well, potentially. Well, with those cuts, wouldn't it make sense for us to look at how to be more inclusive with or other organizations to be able to provide some of the things that we won't get provided if cuts happen for the summer programming? And looking at that fee schedule, because when I looked at the amount of dollars you're talking about, 1.6 million, that's 0.018% of our general fund budget. So we're not really talking about a whole lot of money that we're making off of this.
Did we lose them?
Right.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, no.
And I would say my sort of the same thing as if we're having cuts, I know it's 1.6 million, but it's like if you there's a Scottish saying that's like, if you mind the pence, the pounds will take care of themselves. So if we're allowing more groups in for less cost, so we're not recouping as much of our cost to have the buildings open, that money has to come from somewhere. So I understand this desire to shore up some of the programs we may not be able to offer given budget cuts, but I think there is a cost and that means further cuts. So I think it's a really delicate thing. And I know we want to share our resources and work with a lot of partners who provide amazing programs to PPS students. And at the end of the day, my priority is always going to be the resources of our school day. And if we have to cut something to support an after school program, that's a really hard thing for me to sort of sit with. And Liz, were you going to contribute something there? No. Okay.
I make sure I'm clear. I'm not really talking about during the school day or the school year. I'm mostly talking about after school, like during the summer months or after school hours where we're not using those facilities. So, and I understand that the facilities are supposed to be for our students, which I get. I'm not talking about that. I'm just trying to figure out how do we use our CBO partners and potential new CBO partners to help benefit our kids. And I'm looking at it as trying to be children centered, right?
Sure.
And when I say we only talking about $1.6 million, I'm not saying that that's a small sum. All I'm saying is that when we look at the totality of our budget, we're talking about 0.018% of the budget, right? And so I'm thinking if we can figure out some way, and that was part of my other question that I asked, like for instance, in the next bond, if and the $1.6 million is going to just general education.
Goes to the general fund.
Right? Not necessarily to take care of the heat, to take care of the floor and all that. Just going to the general fund for whatever we deem fit for it to go to. So it's not it doesn't seem like it's direct cost association with the facility maintenance piece of using those spaces, because those funds could be used for anything, right? So I'm just trying to figure out how can we figure out a way to include more folks or more of our kids to be able to use our facilities when they're not in use, because there's a lot of stuff going out in this community right now. There's a lot of crime. There's a lot of kids just islanding by, and as a school district, I would hope that we would want to make sure that all our gyms are filled during the summertime, all our libraries and things that, okay, well, I've been across some, anyway, let me go back. I want to make sure that we're providing as much support for our kids as possible. And I don't want $1.6 million to be a reason why we don't make things affordable or accessible for our kids. And I think my next other question was, for instance, our next bond, could we add in, some money through our bond to cover the maintenance of those things that we're saying that we need to maintain as far as the facility uses of those places, to offset the cost for organizations to use so it could be more accessible? And that was the other question I asked in that.
I think those are excellent questions and exactly the kind of things we want to be thinking about and asking as we look at the future. For the purpose of the policy committee, we had asked staff to come back with information. They've come back with information. Director Hollins, you've sent in some more questions. I'm not sure if either Director DePass or Director Brim Edwards had any other questions at this time. And then we'll come back to you, Director Hollins, if you have more.
I did have a question. One, this is just maybe a data point on the use of the racial equity and social justice lens on our facility use. That a couple of years ago we put in place. There's a requirement in our policy that if a school uses its building after hours for like an event, that they either have to pay for the custodial, and we created a custodial waiver. And I'm wondering what sort of data we have about whether that was used or not. And my favorite one to use is like the Scott PTA pancake breakfast.
Yeah, that's the favorite one.
Yeah, because they charge whatever $4 or $5 to get in, and so then theoretically, even if they had, it's not necessarily, well, it's a fundraiser and a friend-raiser, a community celebration. But if you netted out their custodial fees from that, they actually probably
wouldn't make any money. Sure.
And so I'm curious, when we put that in place, we've communicated it to principals. How has that been utilized?
Not a lot. We can send you the data. We do have that. Now, of course, we had COVID, right? So I think we changed that right before COVID, then nothing happened for like 2 years. The pancake breakfast always uses it. We've had one use so far this year, and I think we had one last year, Kirsten, or just one?
Yeah, let's see, I think 7 total since it was stated.
Yeah, I know. So I wonder, because I know that lots of communities have community events and they can't always afford the fee, or maybe they're not having the fee. So I'd just be interested in digging into a little deeper why it's not used more.
Yeah, and I would say, I do think as this is the year we're gonna start looking at the whole picture here for Cub, and I think we can do better on getting information to the community. When you go to our website, it's under the facilities tab and you have to kind of go looking for it. I'd like to see it be more prominent, so if you're a member of the public, you can easily get to that and have it in different languages and things like that. And we do talk about that, but it's not very prominent. I would agree with you. Now there's, having said that, a lot of community stuff happens during the, like at dinner time or in the evenings, and there's no custodial charges for those. So it's the weekend, but like the pancake breakfast. But I do think we can do better at making that more known.
So if something's in the evening on a school day and like after 6, they don't have to pay for custodial?
No.
Okay.
So it's just already there. It's just weekends, because that's overtime. We have to bring the custodian. We essentially force them to work overtime.
I've actually rented some facilities before after 6, and we did pay a fee but that was maybe government to government, I don't know.
Yeah, this
We
is
did
for
pay-
like
it was
a
very
school
low.
community gets.
Yeah, no, I think there's the permit fee, right?
Yeah,
The $25.
Okay, so it was a permit fee.
Yeah,
It
but
was a
no
facility fee as far as I knew.
There's no facility fee or custodial fee or anything like that.
Okay, for normal, like, working hours.
Right, up until 9 p.m., Kirsten?
Well, I
We
mean,
go till 9? Or I mean, that's
yeah, 9 p.m.
So
yeah.
if you said, okay, from 6 to 9, we want to use the library for our community meeting, we have $25.
Okay.
So that's, yeah.
The
It's
only
8
other
hours, right?
comment I have is I was
Yes.
stopped in the grocery store and the Grant Generals class of 1988 would like to have a guided tour in the summer of 2023.
So
They're
Dan,
having a picnic on the grounds. They would love to see alumni that hasn't seen the new building. Or that's-
1988 that was.
Pardon me? 1988, class of
I think we
88.
could open it up probably a little broader.
only 88.
It's their 35th anniversary, so it's a big number.
It is 8 hours.
8 hours, okay. So I guess, I am interested in, and in the next steps, it said that staff could look at options, so I'm interested in that, but that would be outside of we're obviously in a 21-day comment period, so we wouldn't have that.
Yeah, one of the, what we're looking to do is, and I know, I guess maybe there's some direction from the committee here, we can look at some different options in this very sort of more narrow kind of thing. We also, in 2015, we did the big study, and I think it's time to do that again, where we bring in our community partners, we talk to, bring in the principals, and we get folks together and start getting feedback, and to make whatever changes seem appropriate.
Is that what you're referencing, the 90 to 120 days?
No, that would be the short one, because it's finance, it's community engagement, it's,
Okay.
No, that took a year and a half. I don't think it will take us a year and a half, but it's pretty extensive to make, they are heavily used by the community, and we want to make sure we're responsive.
So I think the question for the committee is, do we want to direct, or do we want to ask for that? We can't direct staff. So are we as a committee interested in this larger exploration, which would take a year, multiple months, to get some more information? Or is there a smaller section or another direction we're interested in looking at CUB? I think the kind of the path we're on is to we've got, this policy and 21-day comment period. We can still pass that policy if we choose to after the 21 days. And as always, policies are iterative. We can continue to work on it as we do more work. So that's the question, is what is the will of the committee at this point going forward? I have a little bit of concern about staff time and wanting to make sure that what we're asking for really is good use of that time. I do think there's some really important questions about how our buildings are used and shared with our community. And again, I know you're talking, Director Hollins, about after school time, but we only get so much money. And if we're paying for custodial time or whatever after school, that does come from our general fund. And I know it's only 1.7 million, so it's not a huge number, but I want us to be conscious, especially in a cut budget year, that there is a cost to some of these things. So what is the will of the committee? It sounds like there is definitely a desire to learn more and to maybe explore options for different tiers of support. Liz?
I just wanted at some point to answer Director Holland's questions about using bond money to offset this. It depends, the short answer, and I'm not a tax accountant, but is the type of repairs and maintenance would have to be capable of being capitalized is the standard to qualify for the bond package. So custodial, cleaning the bathrooms, the kind of stuff that isn't a major improvement that would last for more than a year would not be capable of being put into the bond for that purpose. So just wanted to answer that before we ended the discussion.
Oh, thanks, Liz. That's great.
Sound like she just gave you a Christmas present.
Oh, man, I love that. I love that provision. That is awesome. Yeah, I would love to get more information and look at that deep dive piece. And the reason why I'm saying that is because there's a lot of stuff going on in the summer, and there's a lot of stuff that is just happening that, you know, trying to look for any possible ways as a district that we could be a part of that solution, to help mitigate as much of that as we can. And I'm coming from a personal thing because, you know, I don't want to go to no more funerals if I don't have to. And if we can have any way of help mitigating that at any point with the district, with our facilities, I would love to see if we can entertain that, you know, as well.
I'm curious, Amy, in your committee, I thought I heard at one point you said that you were gonna explore sort of like a cross jurisdictional, potentially doing stuff, some like summer initiatives that had like different entities, and I'm wondering.
We're actually we have a meeting set up next week, or Jonathan's working on that, to talk about, that would be part of the bucket of a children's initiative.
Yeah, I wonder if that.
And that's, I just want to
During
clarify,
the
Director
two?
Brim Edwards, for those who
Pardon?
don't know, that's the intergovernmental committee.
Yeah.
Oh.
So yeah, like some better partnerships with the Parks Bureau and, you know, to talk about facilities as one aspect of how we can collaborate more is definitely part of that conversation.
Because I wonder if that is like a marrying the pieces, between the activities and the facilities use. Makes sense.
So what I'm hearing is Michelle, were you going to add something? Sorry, it's hard to.
I was nodding.
Okay.
I would also like to do a deeper dive.
Okay.
Maybe deeper analysis.
Great. Okay, so I think we've got some direction from the committee for the staff, and I appreciate everyone's great questions and staff for your time, and I appreciate the patience of those who are there to hear our conversation on foundations. So we're gonna, unless there's anything else, we're gonna go ahead and transition to our foundation conversation.
One question. This is just a clarifying question for me. So I was reading the ADs on 3.30 and 011 and 012, and on the first paragraph under number C, is it two people that is responsible for the final authority? Because one that says the senior director of facilities and asset manager has the final authority. Then on the other one, it says the chief operating officer has final authority.
I think the earlier one, the .012, there is no such position as Senior Director of Facilities and Asset Management.
Gotcha.
So I think that's probably just left over. It's the superintendent or his designee.
Oh,
So
gotcha.
we need to clean this up, but I appreciate you
I was
pointing
just
that
kidding.
out.
I was reading over
I thought, oh, I wonder who that is.
I'm thinking like, is it Dan? Right? Like, no, that's a different one.
It's the person I can just point to that doesn't exist.
Right.
I'm like, Dan got another title?
Yeah. I mean, it's a practical matter, yes.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate you
Good.
calling out that mistake.
All right, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
All right, so the foundation policy, I had like 80 emails today about foundations. I know this is a very important issue to many members in our community. I know that it is an issue that many of our school board members hold strong opinions about. What we have done is, based on the board work session that happened on December 6th, staff created sort of a matrix of options. We've also been emailed a policy by the Reform PBS Foundation group, asking once again to consider the idea of a district-wide foundation and no local school foundations, that all fundraising would be district-wide. That is not on the matrix that was sent out, mostly because I didn't hear support by 4 board members for that viewpoint. But again, we should raise it as part of it. The reason that we did not bring this to our last meeting are listed at the bottom of this matrix. Beginning in the 21-22 school year, school administrators are responsible for ensuring that their school-based foundation dollars are paying for actual FTE. And beginning in the 22-23 school year, independent school foundations providing cover for staffing will have to pay at the beginning of the school year rather than being invoiced at the end of the school year. So those were a couple of administrative changes that we're working. And then, as you know, there's a conversation about this idea of an ESSER school improvement grant for the 23-24 school year that each school, it's been proposed. Again, the board has not passed the budget, so this hasn't actually been approved yet because the board, as the budget committee, has to approve it until it's official. But the idea, this came out of our work session, this idea of if each school got a grant, what might that look like? As we hear about buildings wanting to have specific staffing, and it says there what all it can be used for. And there's some
Here, since that says here that that's ESSER funded, that's just a one year
Right.
proposal only for this budget year.
Jonathan, could you speak to that a little bit, please?
Yes, that's correct. So the proposal is using the ESSER funds that run out at the end of the next fiscal year. And so it would be a one-time fund.
So it would be a 1 year thing kind of, and then we go from there, see what happened. So what I would like us to do, if it just, we'll have a conversation about how we want to work through this. I think what I'd like to do is take each policy and practice issue there on the left in bold, the far left column. And there's a couple of suggestions based on things that were raised at the board work session. There's also that third option out there of ending LSFs and doing district-wise fundraising. What I'd like us to do is go through each of these positions and just kind of get a sense of where we as a board are, and kind of then give the staff some direction to write a policy that then we would bring to the policy committee next meeting, our March meeting, to then try to bring for a first reading to the full board. Does that sound like a workable process?
Say that again? I'm joking.
I can say it again. I prepared for this meeting, trying to think through the best way to do this together.
She wants
All
to
right.
go for a walk through the matrix with her, Gary.
Yeah, we're going to walk through the matrix. So the first policy issue is the percentage of local school foundation or independent individual foundation funds raised that are deposited into district foundation and redistributed to underserved schools. I would support the 50% after a first $10,000. $10,000 is the current amount. I would not increase that, but I would like to see 50% after the first 10 go to the PPS Parent Fund. That would be my suggestion. What do you say, those of you there in the room?
I had asked for some modeling to see what the impacts of moving those percentages around would be. And I hope you can hear me. I feel like I'm shouting.
No, you're fine. Some of that was sent out. Jonathan or Liz, could you speak to that?
You haven't seen that.
Jonathan, I'm not aware of the modeling by district staff. Community groups have done that.
Yes, I think there was a foundation group, the reform group had done some of that.
Yeah.
Correct. So there's a model that's out there, not model, let me rephrase that. There is a tool that was developed that if you plug in, certain amounts, it shows that. So I'm going to ask.
We don't know if that's accurate.
I have not done the look back.
But it is a tool that's dynamic that we can use to model expected outcomes. So you predict somewhat. Again, I haven't checked the math either. I'm not a good formulas person, but you can type in at 50%, at 60%, what does that leave left over? How is it distributed? And I think I would be comfortable moving this forward if we actually know what we're talking about in terms of real dollars, and also not just the dollars, but the impacts of those dollars for all of our school communities.
So we were sent that dynamic modeling tool several months ago by the Reform PPS folks that shows what the impact would be about the different amounts. Again, we don't know, there's really no way to predict how school communities may respond to the changes in the rules, whether they would decrease giving as a result of the higher percentage. That's unpredictable. There's a lot of theories that people have about what that might look like, but we don't actually know. But we can see
they're
that
untested, though. I mean, that's what you're saying is there is no way to. We don't have a behavioral economist at our disposal who can.
Right. So, but we do have that tool that the reform folks created that shows what the impact would be on how much would go to the equity fund versus to individual schools. So I hear your request for more information on that at this time. So you're not, what you're saying, Michelle, is you're not comfortable in making a recommendation at this time.
That's correct.
Okay.
One thing that would be helpful, I thought Superintendent Guerrero's proposal potentially is a great potential pivot point or opportunity to pivot to sort of infuse equity across the staffing model. And Jonathan, one thing I wasn't take me through again how it worked, because I couldn't quite it was a briefing that the whole like 75% and you can't use X amount of staff. How exactly would that work?
Just for the ESSER money? The school
Right, so
districts?
it was something that if every school would get either 100, I forget the range, but it was around 100, and then you could use that however, the principals could use that however they wanted, as long as it was aligned with their school improvement plan. And if they used it to buy
It's here at the bottom of the
FTE, but
material.
I'm wondering, so, like how that plays out. So an example of a school foundation that say raised enough money to buy 3 EAs at 150,000. What impact they could?
So they would not be able, if they spend 150,000 in of local school foundation dollars, they would not be able to use these one-time ESSER dollars for FTE.
So what would they be eligible for then?
Run the gamut, contracts, field trips,
So just not,
Well, it says professional development,
professional development,
focused interventions.
focus interventions,
Based on,
focus, I guess that would be-
Consumables.
consumables, right? Again, but with it being clear that it has to be connected to their school improvement plan.
So
And
could-
so one of the things that Dr. Proctor and her team have been really focused on is making sure every school has a school improvement plan that is aligned to the board goals, right? And so what you'll see in these are, school principals and communities wanting to address Black student achievement, Native student achievement, Latino student achievement, et cetera. So that's what you will see. And so on the flip side, the expectation would be that, again, regardless of how you use these dollars, these dollars need to be used to address those outcomes and that impact. Now, if you don't have dollars or flexible dollars, if you will, from local school foundations, then you can use this for FTE purposes next year.
So it could conceivably be used for like high dosage tutoring or
Correct.
as long as they're contracted
Correct.
services.
And so what is the amount that you can't use it above?
Above 75. So every school is getting between 102 and 124. So 100 is the base, $100,000 is the base, and then I believe it's $11 per student. And so that's where you get that range. And so if schools use more than $75,000 of local school foundation dollars, they cannot use this money for staff FTE. And
If they use more than 75,000 on buying staff,
through local school
From their
foundations,
foundation.
they cannot use this for essentially to supplement or augment, essentially what they have there.
which is essentially like
Teachers.
a 0.75 teacher or like a 1 EA and 1.5 EAs. And so but there's no actually limit in, at least part of that proposal, on the amount of, so that if they said, that's okay, we're gonna use our 100,000 something, 100,000+ on all these other things that aren't staff, we can still raise, enough money to buy 6 EAs or teachers or whatever. Okay, great, thank you.
Director Brim Edwards, did you have a thought about where on this matrix you would be comfortable landing? First question.
So from my perspective, I would marry the first item, the percentage and the number of positions funded. So that there would be, again, I really sort of applaud the work, not really, sort of. I do applaud the work of the staff to try and build an equitable staffing and funding model. And I think unless we have some limits on, and that's why I really appreciate the superintendent coming forward with the proposal that might provide everyone with the opportunity to have some flexible FTE. But unless there's some way of limiting it, we once again just get in the cycle potentially of disproportionate and resources depending on the ability of a school community, like school communities having disproportionate resources. So I would, again, I view it as sort of a interconnected package. So would support as sort of a first step to have more equitable fundraising, both the 50%, but also a limit of no more than either 1.5 total FTE, teacher FTE, which could be broken down, or 1 FTE, which could be broken down into 2 EAs. But I think that we need to have some sort of limit, because otherwise we're putting $8 million in and still ending up with inequities.
The 50% after what amount? After the first?
I'm sorry?
50% after
the first 10,000.
After 10,000, okay.
But like I say, only if it's married with this other thing and this other piece on the number of positions. And also, again, I appreciate the superintendent coming forward with something that would give everybody the opportunity to have some flexible FTE that is really focused on school improvement versus just this basic standard staffing model. Because I think that's what schools with foundations have been able to do, is have that flexible FTE.
Director Hollins, did you have a thought of where on the matrix, or with the ending local school foundations and just doing a district-wide fundraiser, where you would come on this percentage of local school foundations fundraised?
Oh man, yeah, I'm torn still. When we look at the state of our schools, and the need for funding, and when I look at it as, all of our kids at our schools, as a parent, of course, I want to make sure that I do everything I can to help benefit my child at their school. And whether that's donating to foundations or getting extra tutors or what have you. And so when I look at this, I'm looking at all of our kids, right? Like, how do we make sure all of our kids have access? I appreciate the ESSER funding, but once again, I think that's just I don't look at that as sustainable, because it's only one-time funds. So I looked at it as a more of a bonus than, a system or a model that we can continue to use. Interesting, I was looking at some models that the Alameda Equity Committee had proposed to their foundation board, and they were on the side of 50%, a 50% split, which was kind of interesting, when I seen that.
When you say 50%, is that 50%?
It was 50% all the way around.
Raising from 33.
Okay,
Yeah.
raising from 33.
Raising from 33 to 50%, yeah.
The 50.
But I thought that was a great idea. So if I had to choose between these two, of course it would be 50%. I wouldn't hold after 10,000, whatever.
There's actually, there's Director Hollins, there's 4 options, 33 after 10, 40 after an amount you set, 50% after an amount you set, or as the Reform PPS group has said, ending local school foundations and making all fundraising district-wide. So there's actually 4 options between
Gotcha.
before you.
Okay. Yeah, So I think we need to move towards a model of not having to do this. You know, I was going back and forth with I probably responded to about 70 emails today, which was actually pretty fun.
Groove.
Yeah, it was actually good. It was actually good. Yeah.
You won that one.
But it was both. It was both sides that had some good ideas. No one said that the reform shouldn't happen, and that's the thing I like. And that was on both sides, so that was positive. To just stop it today, I think, and this came from Heidi. She was like, if we're going to do something, we need to do it gradually, right? And I think, if we are looking at doing this gradually, let's look at how do we do it like year 1, year 2, and to eventually get to a point where we don't have that. And that'll come into what Jonathan was talking about, is there's things that we're planning on doing to hopefully this won't become an issue as far as having to have foundations to pay for staff. And so I am leaning more towards let's start this year at the 50% piece. And that's just that period, not after the first 10,000, just 50% period. But with the understanding that we're going to be trying things and doing different things as far as the funding goes to move so we can not have to do this. And then my goal would be that if we can get all these groups, all these foundations together, right, and really come up with something that we can do as a school district. I think we sell ourselves short when we think that only a certain amount of funders can help subsidize the majority of our schools. I think we're selling ourselves short when we only think that, top donors are the only ones who will be able to give, when we have a whole market of folks who can give $500, who can give $250, who can give $100. And I think we need to really lean into how do we tap into that market as well. If we're going to do this as a community and as a school district, we have to look at that. And sometimes it is, okay, we're going to do 50% this year, but next year we're looking to, not have it at all. And maybe that forces people to get together, to come together and figure out a bigger way to do this. Examples I was sharing earlier today, my kids went to Jesuit at St. Mary's and Central Catholic. When they go fundraise, they raise millions of dollars in a few hours, and it's just hard for me to fathom that a school with 45,000 kids, that we can't blow that out the water each and every time if done right. So that's my stance.
Great, and you'd be 50% after the first dollar, at the first dollar.
Correct.
Gary, the reason that it started out with that first $10,000 they keep is because there's some schools that only raise like $12,000.
Right.
So.
Thanks, Amy. We're going to go ahead and move on to the next section, the positions funded by LSF fundraising dollars. Of those 3.
You forgot Amy.
Amy's not on the committee.
I'm not on the committee, but
Amy's
I do
not
have
on
a
the
question,
committee.
and I can
Really,
also
are you
share
not-
my perspective.
Yeah.
But
So I'm gonna have us go. Hang on. I'm gonna have us go through. Like I said at the beginning, we're gonna go through each of the areas, and those who are on the committee are gonna share their viewpoint about which of the options that are before us we feel are workable for us, and then at the end we can have any loose ends or questions or anything else that we talk about. So we're going to move on to the positions funded by LSF fundraising dollars. And I would support that positions funded by LSFs are limited to educational assistants and other school supports that are not licensed educators. So I think that idea for me, the equity of taking teachers out of it and having it be those other educational supports, to me makes the most sense as we try to move and change and be more equitable in the way this policy is lived out in our system. So that's what I would support.
Ailey, can I ask
Director
something?
DePass, did you have an?
Ailey, can I ask something? Is there the other two options on that line talk about, you know, alignment with the school improvement plan, and I'm wondering that third line doesn't say that, it just is like, well, you can buy EAs, but doesn't imply that that's somehow like aligned with this, you know, school improvement plan and you know, decided by the principal. Is that deliberately not have that language because it's just like, well, that's okay, they can hire those and you're not having this other alignment? Or
Liz, would you like
I'm
to
just
speak to
curious
that?
because the first two are more explicit about the principal.
Yeah, I can speak to that, Liz. Yeah, I think that was intentional to put a different option on the table. I mean, you're welcome to edit this and you know, make it where it is about the school improvement plan, but I think it's just a different option for you to consider, to weigh in.
What's IF? Sorry.
Yes.
Independent foundation.
Individual school foundation, I think is the independent foundation. Sorry. Yes.
You asked me.
So,
Yeah, I would be aligned with you in terms of thinking that the positions funded by the local school foundations are limited to educational assistants and not teachers, especially if I think in that other column, that center column where it talks about aligning with school improvement plans, if we're looking at raising achievement for those people that aren't reading, those kids that aren't up to reading, that I think an educational assistant could be a reading specialist, right? Or a math specialist.
Well, those would be licensed
Oh,
educators.
yeah, because they're
So
not
you-
teachers. Okay, so they're not teachers.
They are.
Oh,
They
they
are
are.
teachers.
But the great thing
They're not
is,
classroom teachers, but they are licensed educators.
Okay, the
in
license.
this year's budget, all schools will have an proposed instructional specialist.
Yes.
Which would be great. So hopefully.
Okay, so it would be that in column, I guess that would be C.
Director Hollins?
Yeah, I don't know why we would put a limit on it at all. I think if we're going to allow them to raise funds, if they want to, you know, according with the school improvement plan, if they want to, you know, use it for teachers or what have you, I don't think there should be a limit on how those funds.
So what I heard you say was in alignment with the school improvement plan though. So you'd be more in that middle column, correct? Okay. Director Brim Edwards?
So I should clarify, just prefacing all my comments, my preference is for a district-wide foundation and as little as possible privately funded FTE. So just put that out there if as one board member. But that doesn't mean eliminating all foundations. On this particular one, if the decision of the board is to continue to allow it, you know, given that teachers, an effective teacher is the most powerful, has the most powerful impact on student achievement. I'm concerned that some schools being able to add teachers and others not further increases the gap. So my preference would be to go with column 3.
All right, our next area is number of positions funded. I would be in favor of not limiting the number of positions that can be funded.
I agree with that. I do have a question though. So
Yeah.
this is to Director Brim Edwards. So you mentioned about the fourth option, as far as doing, would that be something that you would want to do right now, or is that something you would want to stair step to?
Well, either one.
Oh, okay,
But
okay.
I think that's the direction that, my preference will, I think most other school districts have a really robust centralized fundraising and,
Right.
or they don't allow purchasing of teachers by
Yeah,
individual
I've seen that
foundations.
too, yeah.
So and if I look at it, having talked to a lot of schools that don't have the capacity to raise enough, I mean, maybe they raise some, but not enough to pay for FTEs. They're kind of like, well, then they get a equity grant.
Funding.
It's not enough to, so it seems like that's the only way, sort of in this place where you're gonna be heading up that fund that's in a couple hours raising millions of dollars.
The chairman.
I was gonna actually put Amy in charge of that. Amy and Amy says, that'd be a great job for you guys.
Wait, your internet's cutting out.
But yeah, that's what I was just asking what your thoughts was when you said that. If you were talking about doing it like right now, or could it be more of a step to
I mean,
that?
I think you can do it either way.
Okay.
I mean, I'll always take incremental progress over none. And like I say, I think that's the model that most other districts utilize in terms of having the most equitable. If you're gonna allow, and one thing that concerns me is like we have this 1 year where we have ESSER funds. Everybody feels like, oh, finally we were able to have some flexibility to have this targeted, FTE that we can support our students. And then next year it's gone, and we still have a system in which there's disproportionate distribution of resources really based upon solely on the capacity of the school community to raise money. Does that answer your question?
It does.
Take the inch,
I like that.
or like a foot.
Okay.
Okay,
Great.
All right, so Director Brim Edwards, did you, like you said, my internet was cutting out. Did you speak on the number of positions funded? I know you talked about limits before when you talked about the 50%.
I think you were the only one that weighed in. Did you guys?
Carrie did. He said
would,
he agreed with me to no limits.
yeah, I agree to not limiting it if we can get those other pieces right. Including the column D that doesn't show up here, which is more of a district-wide model. If we can get the percentage correct and the, what to hold back and, some of the distribution, I would be in favor of not limiting the number of FTE.
Director Brim Edwards,
I
I know you already sort of spoke to this, but just wanted to give you a chance.
And I'm trying to think about how to be really clear, because if we're talking about EAs, they're actually, I want to say they're 0.44.
Mm-hmm.
Is that? So if it were EAs, I would say like a total of 1.5, or you could have it be, if you had 1.5 FTE, and again, I don't know what the correct way to discuss this or talk about it in terms of the district, but 1.5 is like you could do well, you can get rid of not teachers, but then it would be 3 EAs. Does that make, Jonathan, do you know how to word this?
Yeah, I'm gonna
Say
get the right.
Yeah.
teachers.
Pardon?
I'm trying to take minutes here. 1.5 teachers, but 3 EAs.
Well, for example, if the decision is like no teachers, which I don't know, it seems like what we might do, then I would say 1.5, but that's not 1.5 EAs, it's really
Okay.
3 EAs, because they're
So
0.44s.
EA is equivalent to 1.5 teachers.
I'll get the exact
Right,
number.
I mean, it
Well,
seems,
0.44 is under a half.
Yeah.
We need to talk about.
I don't know
about
why
that.
it's 0.44 versus like a half, but, well, I guess that's
I don't
the
understand that.
cost, I think.
Okay, because benefits are prorated. Right, not prorated, but.
Does that make sense?
And Director DePass, I heard you say no limits as well.
That's correct.
Okay. So the next one is expand use of LSF fundraising dollars to include non-personnel expenses. Jonathan, correct me if I'm wrong. I thought that LSFs could already use some of their dollars. Or is it only independent foundations that can use their dollars for other things besides FTE?
Only independents.
I think that's.
Okay, so right now LSFs can only use it for FTE.
That's been the practice, but there isn't, I mean, first of all, we don't have a policy about it, we just
Right.
have practice, but there is nothing prohibiting foundations from using it on something like FTE, it's just been the practice.
Except for if they are under the fund, they automatically have 1/3 taken.
Correct. Well, if they're an affiliated foundation, meaning they are under the umbrella of the fund for PPS, then automatically $1 gets raised and a 33 of that gets set aside automatically. With independent foundations, it comes at the end in a form of 2 checks. One is, here's the check for staff and here's the check for the parent fund, which is the 1/3 and 2/3.
So it basically this would be giving LSFs the same flexibility that
PTAs.
It's the same flexibility that the independent foundations have.
Yeah,
But-
except for they'd still have 1/3 taken out versus the independent foundations don't have 1/3 taken out for all these other things.
Correct. The independent, my understanding is the independent foundations only have to pay the 1/3 if they use it for FTE.
Yes, and then
I thought you just said that you just have one, oh, the independents, yeah.
And then under this revised option here, I think we can be clearer that it also implies, independent foundation as well, all things, all non-personnel.
I'm trying to decide, I'm trying to understand where you're trying to, this is this taking 1/3 out of everything, not just the staffing, or is this?
Correct.
So it's 1/3
That's not how
off
it's
the
worded,
top.
I don't think, though.
Is it 1/3 first?
I think it's 1/3 of every dollar after the 10,000,
After
not
the 10.
just of what is allotted for
So,
FTE.
yeah, I would propose that for this one, the expanding use of LSF dollars, that we would write the policy so that it would be 50% of everything after the first $10,000 raised.
Yes.
So that no matter what the money was used for, that 50% would go to the parent fund.
So, and I think Director Britton Edwards points out possible unintended consequence, which is you're essentially, because the PTAs can raise money for non-personnel, so a new playground or basketball court or basketballs. Under this policy would impact local school foundations, but not PTAs necessarily. So in other words, you would tax 50% to buy a basketball through the local school foundation, but you wouldn't tax 50% from PTAs.
Right.
So what does that mean? If I'm a donor and I want to maybe give it to this, depending on what your values are, I guess.
So I was wondering, so that would be an unintended consequence, so then we'd see more fundraising through PTAs
Correct.
that are less restrictive. Okay,
So that's an unintended consequence, right?
yeah,
I'm still
that we would
struggling.
know about or anticipate.
I'm still struggling with how this is worded, because expand use of fundraising, it's actually, I think what you're intending to do is that the 1/3 contribution, or 50%, would be requirement would be extended to non-personal expenses. Is that what you mean?
Sure.
Because I don't think.
Well, and I think
that's
this
not what
was
it
here
says.
because if we decided LSF couldn't use money to pay for FTE, were we going to allow them to use money to pay for other stuff?
So to me, it seems like we could probably just take that out altogether
I agree.
and just keep it clean. just 50% or whatever the number is, we just do that and just take that expanding use out.
Yeah, so then I would agree with you, Director Hollins, that we would limit LSF's fundraising dollars only for FTE. Is that good with everybody?
Thanks,
Can you repeat that? Sorry.
So that the local school foundations fundraising dollars can only be used to fund FTE. They do not have flexibility to use that money for other items.
Well, and also, I don't think we have any schools that have local school foundations that don't also have PTAs or booster groups and other groups that can do stuff other than FTE.
Wait, so now foundations would only be able to use their funds on teachers, which is not their current practice.
So Bryony, there's two different kinds of foundations. There's local school foundations and then there's the independent foundations. So like Cleveland is an independent foundation, so they have different rules. But the local school foundations that are part of a more cooperative model, they are the ones we can limit because they're not independent 501c3s. And so those local school foundations have only been able to use their dollars to fund FTE, and we would maintain that as the current practice. Okay, so is everybody, what I'm hearing is consensus on maintaining the limit for LSFs to only use dollars for FTE, is that correct?
So,
Michelle?
but I don't think that's the question that Jonathan was asking. Am I right, Jonathan?
Okay.
I don't want to speak for you, but I think we have two different concepts happening.
In this one, me too, I'm confused.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, I think there's, maybe on this question, I'll try to clean it up in saying, well, I think there's two questions. One is, are local school foundations allowed to raise money beyond FTE? Is one question. Then the second question is, are local school foundations, should local school foundations, I'm gonna use the word tax, right? Tax for the use of dollars beyond FTE?
Instead of tax, you could say share.
Share, thank you.
So I got another question. So if we're taking 50%, if we're taking 50% of the dollars, ask me why do it matter what they decide to spend that other 50% on? Should they better spend it on whatever they want to spend it on at that point?
Also, doesn't not every.
But we only take the 50% if it's buying staff. So if you're fundraising, so for example, Vestal's got this big outdoor playground.
So we only take 50% of their buying staff.
Can we change that?
So yeah, thank you.
I
Right,
think that's
smart is
not
what,
the
right. I love it. So can we just do it to where we just take 50% total, and then whatever they choose to do with the 50%, the other 50%, they can do what they want to do with?
Yeah, so you could do that. I think there's unintended consequences.
It's always going to be blowback for.
Well, I mean, but I think what will happen, I think practically what will happen is, if I have $50,000 that I want to give, I'm going to give it to the Roosevelt PTA instead of the Roosevelt Local School Foundation, because Roosevelt Local School Foundation will charge me $50 to share versus over here it'd be $50.
Unless your values are driving you to want
Unless
to give
your-
50% to
Unless
Roosevelt
your
and
values
50% to the rest of the district, which many people's values are driven
Sure,
by that. Most
absolutely.
donors to local school foundations are driven by the
Let's
value that they want to share.
go with that. I like that.
But that 50%, even if we take it no matter what they're spending on, they can still, that other half, the 50,000, whatever, like the 25,000, they can still spend that on FTE, like the actual foundation. Obviously, they have less, but if the donor wants to give in order to give towards FTE, then I feel like that would remain the same.
Yeah, I mean, the challenge, again, one of the other, unintended consequences that will happen with this is, you will govern the independent foundations a bit more, because like the Lincoln Foundation, it is essentially 3 in 1, right? It's the PTA the Booster Club, and the local school foundation. So you give to Lincoln, you give $10 to Lincoln, it's going there. It is that independent foundation that's doing its own work with principals to identify how the monies are spent. Possibly, I mean, so if you tax, so you could say, we're gonna tax everything that comes into the Lincoln
Share.
Foundation. Should take a share, what comes into the Lincoln Foundation. But at Cleveland, if there's a Booster Club, PTA, and independent or local school foundation, then it gets a little bit murky. And if I'm a donor or if I'm,
I think it's cleanest to just say that when you're buying FTE.
I'll defer to you all in terms of. I just want you to think about. I want you all to.
I get it. I get it as a donor. If you decide, well, if I give to the local school foundation, 10 grand, and I know 5 of that is going to the Portland School Fund, I might say, you know what? Maybe I'm gonna give this 10 grand to the PTA, and they can use it how they want to use it, or the boosters, and even PTAs can give money to the local school foundation. So I understand that, but I think I guess I don't think it's up to us to, judge people's morals or how they're going to spend their money and which way they're going to spend their money. I think you let people, like Amy said, if they value this for this way, then you let them do it that way. I mean, but I think it's still to keep it clean, at least for me, is to be like, hey, if we're going to take 50, if we're going to share, they're going to share 50% from the school fund, then we don't worry about what they spend another 50% on. If we just take it from the whole pot. And then people are going to donate where they donate. We get it, but they're going to do that regardless. Even if they know 50% of the FTE is going, they're going to say, oh, well, you know what? Maybe we donate somewhere else anyway. So I don't want to try to, worry about where people are going to put their money at, as opposed to just trying to make it cleaner, because the ultimate goal is for us to do the stuff that we're going to do in April, and then next year do it bigger, and so that way this conversation is not even relevant at that point.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I would say,
and this year would be great because they got the additional money from ESSERS to kind of offset however they do that. So I think this would be a great pilot year to pilot something like that to see, because they have this extra money that's coming in.
Okay.
Yeah.
I want to move us along a little bit here. I feel like we've had a really robust conversation, and actually, Director Hollins, you've convinced me to change my mind. So I agree with you that we should not limit what LSF can spend the dollars on, but that it should be after the first 10,000. My view is after the first 10,000, 50% of everything raised goes to the parent fund, but that we don't, if they want to spend it not on FTE, that's fine. Director DePass and Director Brim-Edwards, where do you land on this question?
So I just a clarification. So thinking of 2 projects. One, Vestal, they have this big dream to have a covered playground, and it's going to be, $200,000, and they're raising, dollars and, $5 increments at their, family nights. I think it's going into their PTA because they don't have an LSF. So that wouldn't be impacted. They wouldn't be giving half of their $5 to the bigger fund, would they?
according to this conversation, no.
Okay. So only if they use the LSF would that be the case? I guess I'm just trying to think that my understanding is almost everybody uses their LSF only to buy FTE because it has a 50% share, a 30% sharing.
Right, and operationally, I think, we'll have to think about, so if this is the new direction, staff is gonna have to think through, the checks, the millions of checks that they're gonna have to cut for every little detail, every little thing. Like, here's a bunch of basketballs, or here's a bunch of, so we'll have to think through some of those processes.
Yeah, I guess I'm not sure what you get out of making that change, and so I'm just gonna play something more out, because I do think if the concept then extends to like anything that's non-staff, I think about like all the field trips and international travel. It's like I don't see that PBS is gonna take 50% of like, hey, you fundraise for that trip and then raise actually another 50%. So I just think we need to be absolutely clear what we're talking about, because I actually think, if you say they can do it, use it for whatever they want, that you're not going to see a huge change.
Conceptually, I agree with you. I think what will happen is, to Gary's point, I mean, you know, people will vote with their feet, right? They will vote with their
Yes.
dollars.
They'll
And so
defer
I
it.
don't know if it will yield much difference from a policy perspective.
They'll divert where that
Right.
goes.
I do want to think, and I think we're having two conversations a little bit, right? I think there's the dollars raised and like how do you solve for dollars raised? And then there's the question about the impact of the dollars on school communities, right? So I think there's a little bit of two conversations on
There
how do you
is.
govern how people give, and then how do you govern how dollars are used? You know, and I think I just want to kind of note that as I'm like listening. To
It's also who's making the decision too. So I think, you know, we talk about schools making decisions based on what they have to spend. You know, I think I agree with that practice, that if it's a field trip that's needed, you know, for some of our schools that, you know, don't have access to transportation, then maybe that's, you know, the administrators make that decision. So, yeah, I don't want to limit how it's spent. Again, I'm really concerned about the outcomes and what's our problem statement? What are we
Right.
actually trying to solve for here?
We still haven't
Generally-
identified that since
Well,
the
and
beginning
so
of
we're
this
starting a
conversation.
policy decision without having a problem statement, which
Exactly.
as someone that does this work, I you know, I mean, I think the problem is that we have gross inequities in our system that burden some communities and benefit others, and we're trying to equalize that. We're trying to lessen the burden.
And that's a great segue into our next thing, which I think is really vital. It's about the access to school fundraising events. And I think this, you know, I know in some of the public comment we got today, there were people reflecting on the ways that some of these fundraisers create sort of community within community. And so I'm definitely in favor of including all who wish to participate by requiring that 10% of admission tickets to any fundraising event be at no charge.
I would be,
Director Hall?
yeah, I can just tell you from my
I'll
personal
do it
experience as a single parent, that wanted to contribute, you know, but couldn't write the checks, but I had time and I could, contribute in other ways. And I always felt like it was a really kind of exclusive clubbiness around the fundraising. So I'd like to see access. I mean, if people want to come, support their school communities, then I feel like we should make that feasible. We should make that possible.
Great, thank
We
you.
should allow for helping your kid's school at whatever level.
No cost.
Absolutely.
I think most
For no cost.
foundations do that now, but I think it'd be good to codify it.
Great.
But they
Well,
do
and that
free
could also
tickets.
have to do with the time of the meetings that are held, you know, to be more inclusive spaces. I'd
So
like
Amy-
to see us work together.
Amy, I'm going to ask you to hold your comments till the end so that those of us who are members of the committee can get through our work, and then there'll be room for you and Andrew and our students to speak. Michelle, so I heard you say yes to the 10% of admission tickets be at no charge. Director Holland and Director
Well,
Burnett
I
Edwards.
don't know if we want to say 10% or if we want to say the people in our building who, why do we limit it to 10% if there's 20% of people who are on free and reduced lunch?
I agree with that.
That's a
Yeah.
great idea.
It's like a
So,
rounded number.
I would just again, food for thought. You know, I think these organizations, as they're raising dollars, they're using those dollars to pay for the events that they're throwing, and so you know, there's also that consideration. If you all of a sudden invite 100 people at $500, I don't know, whatever.
Yeah.
You know, are you essentially using those dollars that you're trying to raise for your school to have an event? And I just want to point out.
So there's a cost for food and decorations and
Correct.
flowers and keeping the lights on and all that. That's true, but I think limiting to 10% is
Sure. No,
random.
Absolutely. Yeah.
What if we say
it's
at
definitely
least?
a
What if
random
you
number.
have like 40% of people in your school community on free and reduced lunch? So you're saying, you know, a very select few of you, 25% of you can come. It's just food for thought. I'm not, you know,
No, I think it's a great idea, Director DePass. What I would propose is that we change this language to say include all who would wish to participate by requiring that at least 10% of admissions tickets be at no charge, and that the percentage of admission tickets at no charge matches the free and reduced lunch amount if it is above 10%. Because I think some of our schools have a lower than 10% free and reduced lunch
Yeah,
amount that are
that's right.
foundation schools. So I think that's a great way to offer that to make it equitable.
Or, I mean, there's so many ways you could do it. You could do sliding scale, so people, if they do have a couple extra dollars, or if you have a SNAP card, or if you're, there's ways of making it so people that don't have cash can participate.
Director Hollins and Director Brim-Edwards, where do you land on this one?
I am going to be supportive. I'm going to be the radically supportive of incremental progress and data collection. So I think the language that you and Michelle just discussed is a good start, and it would be good to get data collection, collect data, like, did that make a difference in people get to attend? Did that totally change, did it totally change the event or make it not a fundraising event? And so, you take a year and, get a cycle of like what impact that has. But I definitely don't think, I would say I don't like the existing practice of like, if you can't afford to attend, you can come if you want to work at the event. Because to me it's great if people want to volunteer, but also an event, but it shouldn't be like, hey, that's the only way that you can attend is if you come and be in service to others.
Gary, what are your thoughts?
Oh, gosh. So I guess my thing is the purpose of the fundraiser is to raise funds. So if part of the tickets is to raise funds, by giving away tickets, I know I might be in the minority on this, but giving away tickets, then we're not raising funds. So I guess it's like, and I'm just put it out there, like if I can't afford a ticket to the fundraiser, am I going to be able to afford to participate in the fundraiser as well? But if we do have to choose something, I'll go with Director DePass's suggestion. But I guess my thing is trying to raise funds.
Yeah, it makes it harder, but I think we also have that value of community that we've definitely heard. All right, our last.
Director Lowry.
Yeah.
Sorry, I just want to make sure I get back to Director Brim-Edwards around the FTE and license equivalent. So FTE and license equivalent are used to compare classified FTE. For this calculation, 2 classified FTE is equivalent to 1 licensed FTE.
Yeah, so however we word it,
Yeah.
it'd be like 1.5 licensed classes or equivalent.
Great.
And then our last area is the limit on certain auction items. And based on personal experience, I highly support the no school-based privileged experiences. So eliminating things like principal for a day, single locker assignments, parking spaces, and the rule that any student experience items must be open to the entire cohort, regardless of who bought the item.
I was just gonna ask, is the student experience item, what is that?
Well, it could be like the teacher takes a group of kids to Powell's and out for ice cream.
Not just for who pays for it, it's like the whole classroom or the whole.
Yeah.
I'm getting a whole education on this, like, what is that? Principal for a day?
Oh, there were knockdown, drag out, like fights, elbows thrown around those student experiences.
Yeah, so we run the gap.
This is a new world to me.
And I want to acknowledge staff for, every time these things come up, because they end up creating challenges. So as an example, over the years, we've seen schools, auction off the premier parking spot in a campus, right? So that parents can drop them off. Or, there was a time where you get to pick your teacher. I've seen that.
Oh my God.
Which is not okay at all. It's the weirdest. So
Front row.
we're just being transparent. These are the things that we hear, very honestly, lockers, right? Like you get the premier locker, or you get to hang out with the principal for a day, So those are
Or you get the front row,
Going to
the front row of seats at graduation, 5th grade graduation, you get the front row.
Yeah, so those types of things.
I'm just curious how much that raised.
A lot. It raises a lot.
A lot?
I think I paid $250 for principal for a day, and front row of graduation was too expensive for me.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah. So, Director Brim Edwards, Director Hollins, Director DePass, where do you fall on this one?
I mean, you say, Jonathan, it creates challenges because, could you speak more to that?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, it creates, it creates this us, them, right? A lot of feeling of like, oh, because you have money or because you have access, you get to hang out with the principal. That my kid doesn't have, I don't have the resources to pay, $5,000 for the premier parking spot, even though I need it because I'm always running late to, so
Right.
I mean, so there's a lot of that. I mean, there's ethical questions, I would argue, like, should you pay for what teacher you should get? Like, those are not, that's just not okay.
I guess you can look at, but all the auction stuff, you can look at it through that lens. Like, for instance, if we auction off, 2 American Airlines tickets, well, those who can afford it is going to pay higher than those that can't. So I want to be careful that we don't, miss what the fundraisers are. The purpose of the fundraisers is to raise funds, not necessarily to, make things equal as far as can afford what at a fundraiser,
But I think if we're selling I don't think the school should be for sale. Like the access to the principal, the teacher you want, time with your teacher. That's the school, and that should be equal access for all of our kids. That's what. Yeah, so you can buy the fancy basket with all the dinners out because you can afford it. But I think the thing I have a problem with is those kids who can't or don't get to then go on this special day with their teacher or have some of these privileges within the school because their parents either choose not to or can't participate in the fundraisers. So I don't think we should be selling our school-based experiences as part of our auctions.
I went to an 8th grade that had an A class and a B class. It was a private school in Washington, D.C. And I was in the A class, and I remember taking a trip to Hershey, Pennsylvania. We won a trip. And, you got to go to Hershey Town. And I never forget the feeling of wondering what those B kids were doing back home. I mean, it was really, and as an adult, I think, gosh, I would never want to be party to any, I don't want people to be excluded from experiences. And so, I agree with you about the school-based, if you go to a public school here in Portland, you should have as much opportunity to see the principal under positive circumstances as everyone else.
Director Brim Edwards, do you have a thought on this one?
I do, and to me, I agree with that, and I don't see any difference than, hey, this class has money so they can get, an additional teacher or additional EA. So, like I say, I'm fine with limiting it, but again, just in other ways, we're allowing there to be, a different set of rules. And again, the reason why I'm so focused on staff is that is the thing that we know that drives student achievement. And so it just, the other things are also important from an equity standpoint, but the staff in the schools actually have a direct impact, I hope, on student achievement. And we're allowing there to be differentials on top of our equity fund.
I appreciate everybody getting through all of these things. What we're going to do now is we're going to turn it over to hear from our students. I don't know. I can't see. I think Byrony is there. I thought I saw Abby there, right? And is Frankie there as well?
This one's Frankie, yeah.
Frankie, sorry. Again, I can't, it keeps zooming out, so I can't see. So I'll have, so it's just Byrony and Frankie today. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so Byrony will allow you to speak and share any thoughts or questions you might have. Then Frankie will give you a chance. Director Constam will give you a chance. And then Director Scott is also on the call, I understand. And what I ask is that folks be allowed to speak uninterrupted. I know, again, there's a lot of ideas around this and there's a lot of passion, but I think it's more effective if people can just say their ideas and express themselves before anyone else responds. And then we can have some time for conversation and questions at the end. So Bryony, can you reflect on what you've heard, what ideas you might have, what you're thinking about foundations after hearing us go through this process?
I'm gonna let Frankie go first since she's on the policy committee, and then I'll go after.
Okay.
Perfect.
I would just agree. I feel like with you, because I feel like by looking at these extra experiences and like shifting the focus to that, we're kind of ignoring like the real heart of the issue, which is like the actual education and like the access to the teaching and all of that. And I'm just very concerned about this discussion because it's very inaccessible. Like I don't have a lot of information that I have access to. Like I have this, and I'm actually on the committee, and I know how many students at my school have no idea what's going on. We had an article in the Post, and some people learned from that, but not very many. And the conversation, I feel like, needs to have more outreach to the communities, because those are the people that are most impacted, and we can sit in this room and we can talk about what we think their opinions are and what we think the impacts on them are going to be, and where they're going to direct their funding, or what's this going to affect the students like, but we actually need to talk to them. And I'm just concerned about how many decisions are being made and how like it's very like black and white, like we do this or this instead of talking to our communities and actually seeing what we think will work.
Yeah, I think, so for me, I see two, I guess my first one is a question. So if we increase to 40 or 50%, will that give us enough money in the fund to actually grant teachers, like enough money for an FTE? Just schools.
If the fundraising is the same as last year, it'll be about $500,000.
So Director Constam, I'm going to ask that you let staff answer that question.
I don't know if staff has that information at their fingertips. It's about $500,000. If you want to say that,
Divided
your
among
staff.
60 schools though.
Divided by
And
60
so-
schools, yeah.
So yeah, I think for me, I guess that's really more of a means to an end to my actual question, which is that I really see two ways forward here. I think that the only way to get this to like an equalization type thing, which I know that Director Hollins has been very clear about, like it can't really be equitable if we're going to keep necessarily local school foundations, just because it is a mechanism for some schools to raise more. Unfortunately, there will always be the reality that some schools can raise more than others. So I think my question is, how do we get it to a point where the fund has enough money to actually give schools FTE? And for me, that's my only consideration. I think that it's great that we're considering like limiting these certain option items, and I know since we're kind of working off a model of best practice, it makes sense why we would include these things. But for me, I guess I'm a little less focused on those things. I also know we brought up stuff about, well, we should change the number of tickets that are being sold with no cost to whatever percentage the free and reduced lunch is. I wonder if schools like above 40% free and reduced lunch really have active local school foundations, which in our experience, I don't think they do. So I think that seems a little arbitrary to me in terms of like, let's not spend a ton of time on it. I guess the only thing is like, so if we're not going to explore a universal foundation, and if we don't want to eliminate local school foundations as it is, then what can we do to make sure that the fund has enough money to actually grant FTE? And so I think that could be increasing it to a percentage in which there would be enough money, or proposing limits to FTE where every like full FTE raised over like 1 or 2 is then allocated to another school, or allocated to a school most in need, or something like that. Because I think for me, I'm just focused on if the grants, and we've heard from the community, I do think, in the fact that the grants do not give what those communities need. Like $10,000 is not enough. It's not enough to get $5,000, and it's really like, I hate to say this, but like it's chump change in terms of
It is chump change.
what
It's okay
these
to
schools
say it.
need. And so I guess give me the data on whether 50% is enough. If it's not, let's up it. And then if no percentage is really going to get us where we need to be, then let's put that limit on FTE and start taking the full FTE funds over a certain amount and putting that somewhere else into a school that needs it more. And probably allocation based on our equity-based funding model is probably the best for best practice and that kind of thing. But I appreciate the proposals, but I think that there's probably a little more work that needs to be done.
Right.
Thank you, Student Representative Mann. Director Constam, would you like to share your thoughts or viewpoints that you've had on this discussion?
Just a couple of things. One is, that's really important to me is that our fund for PPS is new. It's only been around for a few years. It's done a really good job of doing, finding partners in our community for specific grants and specific projects, but it's still growing. And so I think this is very much an and conversation. I want to see the fund for PPS grow and have more individual donors. Are you listening?
I'm listening.
Have more individual donors who want to support the district as a whole and who are more involved in school-based granting as opposed to just district-wide initiatives. And I think that we're doing that, but I want to see more of that. I think this is very much an and conversation there. The other thing that I think is really important is to just make sure this conversation is always grounded on facts, because when we're talking about the perceptions of inequity in a few schools buying a few FTE, it's important to realize that these are the schools with the lowest student to adult ratios in our whole district. These are the schools with the highest class sizes in our whole district. So, for example, on the second question, when we're talking about not being able to fund teachers, if we do end up having a full board conversation about that, then I think it'll be important for board members to have the data about what that means. It means you're immediately eliminating 42 teachers that are currently funded. And it also means that the general fund is going to have to kick in for a lot of teachers because it's going to put those foundation schools over their class size thresholds because they're already the biggest class sizes in the whole district. So we're going to need to see that impact analysis if we consider that. I would not support limiting it, and I do very much support this revised option 1 that any investments have to be tied to school improvement plans. And I love that. And especially if it's teachers, we think about our schools with foundations, they have specific student populations that are struggling that they don't get any resources to serve from the district. And so the ability to really focus on those kids that need it, even if they may be, a small minority of students in that school, is really important. And I think we went through a number of positions funded. It doesn't make sense to have a cap if you're gonna let people fundraise. I totally support increasing to 50%, and I just really want to remind us every time to really have a fact-based conversation about what these dollars buy, and let's grow the fund for PPS. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Director Constam. I know that Director Scott has some ideas he'd like to share.
Great. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Good. So I'll one specific and one more general comment. I'll be brief. On the specific side of things, particularly on the percentage, I would really like to put on the table and see modeled what a decreasing percentage would look like as fundraising goes up. So starting with a high percentage, but the more a school fundraises, the lower that percentage could be. I don't know what those numbers, again, we'd have to model it, but thinking about, if we start at 50%, maybe for the first 100,000, the second 100,000 is at 40, maybe the third 100,000 is at 33. What that does is incentivizes schools that can raise a lot, that the more they raise, the more dollars are staying, but the early dollars they raise are going, to be shared. There are some downsides to that because some of the school foundations that only raise a little bit, that maybe are actually the less wealthy schools, then they are giving that full 50% up front. So it's not a perfect solution, but from someone mentioned behavioral economics earlier, from a behavioral economics standpoint, I think it aligns the incentives with what we want, and sort of getting folks to really be thinking about those early dollars going out. I think on the more general comment, this is very general. The rest of it, I appreciated the conversation, and I don't think I have much to add on the other specifics that you went through, Director Lowry. I think on the more general comment, I continue to want to be optimistic, but it's getting harder and harder. Just hearing some of the emails and other things we're getting, that this is an area we should be able to really have community conversations and find some common ground. I've tried really hard to meet with and listen to both sides of this. I think that both sides are coming with a really genuine view. And I've said this before a couple of times. I mean, I think that there are inherent inequities in a system that allows, the wealthy schools to raise as much as they want. And actually, I have yet to meet someone who says, yeah, just let the wealthy schools raise as much as they want for their kids and buy as many teachers and other things as they want. That's fine. I haven't met anybody who says that. And I think the folks looking at foundation reform are coming to it really saying, look, there are some inherent inequities here that in our society that this system is exacerbating. How do we fix that? The folks doing the fundraising are doing the right thing for their school and for their kids. They're coming to this to say, we've got high class sizes. We've got, we need additional support. We need EAs. We need other support. And we're raising money for doing that. Why are we being attacked? And I think that's a really good question. And I will tell you, I received over 300 emails today. They were about evenly split. And I'm really frustrated because the tone in both sides of them is it is not polite. Let me just put it at that. And I guess I would just encourage folks, like, I feel like at the board and at the staff level, we really are trying to work our way through this and have an and both conversation. I can believe that this system perpetuates some systemic inequities. I can also recognize that moving too quickly away from it, making radical reforms, is going to have a very negative impact on our kids. And Gary, I think you said that early on, and I just want to second that, right? We need to be thinking about the impact of our kids. And all of us, I think we share as a community some really similar values. And I just hope, and maybe this is just everybody needs to get off what they see on Facebook or social media and just start talking to one another about it. But I think the values are really there. And the question is just the specifics. And what do we do? How do we make the system more equitable? And how do we do it in a way that doesn't do harm, to our kids in our schools moving forward? So that's my pie in the sky. I'm going to continue trying to be optimistic, but today was a frustrating day, I have to admit.
Thank you, Director Scott. I appreciate everybody for that in-depth and robust conversation. I know this is a complicated issue with lots of viewpoints, and so I appreciate everyone taking the time to really walk through kind of where we are in these matrices. We're going to move on to so the next thing that's going to happen is staff is going to take this conversation that we had today and some of those places where the members of the committee landed, also taking in the students' comments and Director Constam and Director Scott's, come back with a draft policy for our next committee meeting. And we'll go from there. So
Director
thanks, everybody.
Lowry, may I ask, I've heard a couple of times for people asking for like examples or a model. And I just heard Director Scott ask for that too. And I think it would be helpful to us to see and be walked through what the various impacts are, because right now it's I know a lot of people hate math. I'm not one of them, but I think it would be very helpful to see on the screen, to look at the Excel spreadsheet, to look at that tool all together and look at what will happen if we move X, what happens to Y.
Right. And Jonathan
I'm hoping that, it's great to get a policy on paper. It's also nice to have a model that we can walk through at the same time. And maybe we have an expert that can explain the formulas or whatever.
And Jonathan did send out the modeling tool that we had talked about earlier to all of the committee again. So we will bring information with the policy when it comes next time.
I guess what I'm asking for is, that's great, but let's have a conversation in community about that, because it might be not understandable for some people, that's all.
Okay. Thank you. We're going to go ahead and move on to the military recruitment conversation. And I think either Mary or Liz is going to kick that off for us.
I can speak very briefly to it. The policy is just an effort to update it to reflect changes that have happened since the policy was originally enacted, which is paragraph 3, which is compelling speech from PPS employees on a topic that has moved since this policy was originally enacted. So the AD that supports this policy has lots of requirements for information being provided by schools in the recruiting context and across a lot of spectrum, not just military recruiting, but other higher ed recruiting efforts. So we thought that the reflection or the requirement that all district personnel affirmatively offer information that they may not even have, that has moved quite a bit since the policy was enacted, was an appropriate update and not seen as a huge substantive change. It's hard to determine what actually is how much that's being adhered to. Paragraph 4 is it's a historical reference, but that the AD was implemented at the time, and I think needs to be a current document in the governing document, not a resolution from, I think, 11, 12 years ago. So it's not intended to signal any massive change from that resolution, but it's also endeavoring to be a freestanding living document.
Thanks, Liz. Is there any discussion about these changes?
No, just some background is because I was on the board when these changes went into place. It was when the No Child Left Behind bill required school districts to allow both the Boy Scouts and the military into the schools. And at the time, both organizations had discriminatory policies. So it wasn't an option just to say, as a school district, we don't allow organizations that discriminate against adults or our students to, come into our schools and recruit or hold meetings because the federal law didn't allow that. So this was the mechanism by which we stated our values, that we didn't agree with these organizations' discriminatory and exclusionary policies. Both organizations have since evolved their practices considerably, and it's a very different landscape. Oh, Ailey, you're going upside down and sideways. A very different landscape than it was at the time, so it seems that the language really isn't needed anymore. But there was a reason for it.
Yeah, and a very good reason at the time. I would be comfortable moving this out of committee for the full board. Michelle, Gary,
Yes.
Julia. Yes, Gary.
Yeah.
Yep.
Julia.
Uh-huh.
Okay, great. We'll go ahead and move that out. The next is the memo around the impact of adding religious holidays. And gives us some information. And we at this point need to decide if we want to identify criteria to determine which religious holidays would satisfy the taking days off school, and if that's something we want to continue to explore. What are your thoughts? Is there silence in the room, or is my internet connection weird?
Silence.
We're reading.
Reading.
Reading, okay.
Yeah.
I can show
Sorry.
you that there's a train going by right now, so.
Ailey, what was your question?
So this memo sort of says that the next step would be we need to come up with criteria to consider if we wanted to add holidays to the calendar. So we would need to come up with criteria that are not based in any particular religion, that to decide what holidays we should honor.
And I think that's it's in the context of, if you landed that and you selected some, you have some other issues other than selection. That would be the beginning. You would have instructional hours, bargaining, and budget issues too. And so to put those all together, it's more than an academic exercise if you want to move forward. And this is just a very early, high level look at what the impact considerations might be, and then we'll take direction from the board.
So we have to decide if we want to move forward on looking at addition of religious holidays or not, based on the facts from this memo that just lays out. We'd have to come up with a selection criteria, and then we would also have to look at instructional hours, bargaining, and then the budget impact of 2.5 million per day.
Yeah,
So
I would be in favor of looking at, I mean, we know that there will be impacts, but looking at, selecting that criteria, as long as it was a selection committee that was representative of some of the religions we're looking at.
Liz, would you want to speak to what that, you and I have had some conversations about constitutionally what that selection criteria has to be?
Well, they have to be religiously neutral, but it doesn't mean that the people discussing the religiously neutral concept have to be religiously neutral. So, I mean, we're not going to screen people based on their religious beliefs. And so I think that's we like a diversity of voices, but we're really not going to be asking people that religious or screening them out because of religious beliefs.
But we can't use something like the number of people who practice a certain religion in the county. That is not an allowable criteria, correct?
No, that's exactly what we did use. That's religiously neutral because it's a percentage of population question, right? It isn't right. So that's when we selected the dates that were on the school calendar that for the 23-24 year. Those cleared a population threshold in the county, and that's a religiously neutral criteria.
Great, because I was really confused by that line in this memo. Like, wait, isn't that what we did do? And so now it's not allowed. So that is.
Well, it would be similar to our language policy and how we, what languages do we decide to make translations into? Also have to meet a population threshold for whatever the metropolitan area is. So, okay. Yeah,
right.
So
sorry.
I would be in favor of taking a closer look at which of those days would be honored.
It's looking at the criteria first.
Looking at the criteria.
Yeah.
To determine which of those days may be honored. Thank you.
I would also agree with that, Director DePass. Director Hollins and Director Bim Edwards, do you have a perspective on this?
I'd like to pursue the looking at what it would take. To me, that's the natural next step. And I heard from enough people. When we made the change to add to the calendar, I did hear from a lot of people in the school community, very, very positive feedback that the district made those
Me too.
those changes by just putting it on the calendar, not even making it a day off. And so I think it's worth and they did raise that there's still the issue of using personal days and everything else. So I'm interested in what it would take, what steps we would have to go through, what the cost would be. Obviously, conversation with our labor partners, but I think it's a good conversation to have as a more diverse district.
Dr. Holland?
Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Liz. I want to hear you.
I was just wondering, at this point, is this a consideration without budget boundaries? Is this just a free-flowing exercise to start with that and then to see what can be afforded? Or are we coming into that with some constraints?
I guess I would like to see the costs of this.
It's about 2.5 million school day that would, it's a paid holiday.
But how's that going to reflect our budget now?
Well, this would not be for next year, I think, anyway. We've already, the calendar started set. So how would it impact?
Between 324 or 24-25?
24-25.
24-25. Yeah, but I know we're looking at cuts then too, so I just want to be mindful of that because we're estimating to be cutting thin as well, so.
And I'm so sorry, Dr. Hollins, I'm having terrible technology today, which is annoying to me. It must be everyone else. I didn't hear the last thing you said. Would you mind repeating it?
So I just want to be mindful for 24-25 that it's been projected that we're going to have another cut process. So with adding this financial piece, I would like to see how that lines up with that and what that will look like.
Okay, thank you.
Frankie or Byrony, do you have anything to add to this conversation?
Sorry. No, I'm okay. Nothing bad, not for me. Same for me.
Did you say you have nothing to add?
Yeah, sorry, nothing to add.
Okay, no, it's fine. Okay, it sounds like we want to go ahead and continue exploring this. Great, thank you, everyone. We're going to turn now to public comment, and I understand we have 4 speakers. So as the speakers are called, please state your name and spell your last name for the record. You'll have 2 minutes to speak, and we ask that you stick to those 2 minutes so that we can get through all the speakers and end our meeting on time. Ms. Powell, who do we have to speak tonight?
We have Ryan Phillips.
Yes, that's it. Oh, right there.
I'm Ryan Phillips, Phillips. I'm the father of 2 children at Grout Elementary, and I'm also the treasurer of the Grout PTA. One of the more challenging things about the discussion tonight is it really changed what I was going to say. So that would be hard.
Man.
I just want to recognize that folks on all sides of this debate are right about one thing, which is that all BPS schools have unmet needs, and that additional funding, of course, is going to help to address some of those needs. It's even true of those current foundations and schools who are the primary beneficiaries of the current foundation system. And yet, for me, the key question is, given the abundance of needs and the scarcity of resources, how do we allocate the scarce resources we have to meet the highest and greatest needs in PPS? And just, as you may know, over the last 5 years, 10 schools with the largest foundations on average had about $136,000 each to pay on additional for additional staff, or $200 a student, whereas the 46 schools who received grant awards in, I believe, 2022, received on average about $27,000 per year, or about $60 per student. You take that data and you work with the 50% redistribution that people have been discussing today, that would decrease those 10 schools with largest foundations to about $100,000 per year, and it would increase the funding for those 46 schools to about $33,000 per year. Needless to say, that's not going to do much for those schools who are receiving those grants. Now, of course, as folks that have discussed today, the need to go through the numbers, to work through some assumptions and look at what other percentages would do. I did that math right here at the top of my notes, so I would encourage people to double check that as well. The thing that I want to say is that I am here to support in favor of redistributing, or pooling and distributing funding at the district level, in particular, so that we can meet those greatest and highest needs. And I think that will allow us to make sure that we are really addressing the needs and the priorities of the school district in terms of equity at our schools. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Excellent. I always appreciate people who honor that 2 minute time. So thank you very much, Mr. Phillips. Who's next, Ms. Powell?
Oscar Monteri.
Good evening. My name is Oscar Ponteri, Ponteri. I'm a senior at Franklin High School. I recently wrote an article for our school newspaper, the Franklin Post, on private fundraising. Through research and interviews, I realized that foundations are representative of larger issues within our school district, including racial inequity and inequitable student outcomes. I'm here tonight to share my findings and urge bold action. This past year, together, 8 schools fundraised more than the rest of the district combined. Of those, an average 15% of them, 15% of their student body is historically underserved, compared to the district average of 33%. It's no coincidence that these schools are whiter, because many of them draw from neighborhoods that historically excluded people of color through redlining. While these affluent, white, high-achieving schools pool wealth, others struggle. Underserved students at affluent schools that get less funding per student are not getting left behind. To list just one example, at Lincoln, 95% of disabled students are on track to graduate, compared to just 68% at Roosevelt. I believe our students deserve bolder action to limit the flow of funds than simply raising the equity fund. If a 50% parent fund split after $10,000 was implemented this previous year, each school that qualified for parent fund grants would receive an extra $8,800 about if the funds were split evenly. That means Rosa Parks Elementary, where only 6% of the diverse student body meets mathematics standards, would receive a total of just under $19,000, while Dunaway Elementary would walk away with 7.5 times that amount. That's with the 50% mechanism. With this in mind, I'm urging the board not to go halfway with equity. I'm urging the board not to go halfway with racial justice. I ask the board go the distance for our underserved communities. I ask that the board consider a bolder plan that serves all students. We have big problems, and I believe truly we can solve them, but only if we tackle issues like this with courageous leadership and action. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Oscar.
Thank you. Ms. Powell, who's next?
We have Laura Stevens virtually. It just took me a second to look at her.
Would've been done by now.
You should have gone first. Before the discussion.
I'm not sure if you're seeing the message across your screen, Laura, that you're being promoted to panelist. We'll move on to Serena Hollingsworth. Let's see.
All right, Serena, go ahead and say your name and spell your last name for the record, and you'll have 2 minutes to speak.
Okay, I am Serena Hollingsworth, HOLLINGSWORTH, chair of the Alameda School Foundation and have a first and third grader. Hello, and thank you for this opportunity. As this discussion continues, I repeatedly see misinformation being spread and wonder, have the board members really taken the time to research and understand the whole situation before making any final decisions? Some questions for you tonight. Are you aware that last year's budget cuts were not spread out equally, but were targeted, and that schools with foundations had more cuts under the assumption that they would be able to raise private funds? And will that happen again this year? Are you aware of the funding gaps between the schools feeding into Beaumont Middle School? Rigler receives $13,500 per student, and Alameda receives $7,000 per student, which includes the foundation money we raise. Did you know that many schools have a 15-to-1 student to teacher ratio, while schools with foundations have 30-to-1 student teacher ratios? And did you know that some schools receive full electives from the district, while a school like Alameda gets only half year of art class and is expected to fundraise to make it whole? Have you taken time to talk with all principals who use the local school foundation funding? Do you know exactly how those funds are spent? Do you understand how hurtful and offensive the buying teachers language is? No business buys employees, but rather hires as needed, just as a school will hire where it's needed using foundation funds. Have you polled donors to see how they'd react to a central fundraising model or giving for 50%? Have you spent time with foundation volunteers to understand the challenges and work it takes to motivate people to volunteer, actually attend events, and donate their money? Do you know how many hours volunteers put in, and have you polled them to see if they would put in that same time for a central fund? If we move to a central fund for equity purposes, shouldn't we also move PTA and booster fundraising to a central model? Why aren't those organizations that raise hundreds of thousands of dollars for their own schools being put under an equity lens as well? Final question, why are we even talking about this right now? After just announcing last week that more layoffs and eliminations of teachers across the district are coming, do we really want to talk about taking away another funding source? This is a political move being pushed by a few select individuals with a political agenda, not a student-focused one, and it does zero to help any student and actually just lowers the boat for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Powell, is our other person available?
Let me check. I don't think so.
Okay. Well, thank you all for a great meeting. The policy committee is now adjourned. Have a good night.